Raney, you said we're not activists. I now will actually, I think the journey of 1,000 cuts. Ramona, you say.
No. It's very interesting that I saw that journey. I mean, Maria went from not being an activist to
Like
being an
Raney,
activist.
to
Yeah, but and I remember the moment when she said it. Actually, we were at the Edinburgh School at UPenn, and she said it at a conference. She said that journalism is activism, and you could hear a pin drop. And then after that, it was like,
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our conversation on the intersection and the interplay of documentary filmmaking and journalism. I'm Elisa Muñoz, the Executive Director of the International Women's Media Foundation. We've been supporting women journalists for the last 30 years, and we've been leading a monthly series called the Press Freedom Speaker Series, bringing you the intersection of gender and the news media. We're very happy to be here, and I could not be more honored to be with this group of women. I'd like to start by introducing Maria Ressa, a journalist for 35 years and the co-founder of Rappler. We're also joined by Ramona Diaz, the creator of 1,000 Cuts, the story of Maria's fight for press freedom in the Philippines. She's an award-winning Asian American filmmaker whose films have screened at Sundance, Tribeca, and many other top-tier film festivals. Additionally, we're joined by Raney Aronson-Rath, who is the executive producer of FRONTLINE, PBS's flagship investigative journalism series, and is a leading voice on the future of journalism. Welcome to all of you. Maria, let me start by asking, how are you and your team doing? There are a lot of important stories being covered right now, but we know that you all have been covering the typhoon in the Philippines, and I just wanted to check in and tell you that we're thinking about you. How are you?
I mean, good, as good as things can be, I guess. And we're struggling now with the same issues that the U.S. is struggling with, which is, how does a journalist deal with a world where lies spread faster than facts? How do you be a gatekeeper when there are no gatekeepers? So sorry, I jumped into that, but I mean, good. I guess it's such a quickly changing world. And despite the attacks, we are able to continue doing our jobs. That's the best way to respond to it.
Yeah, and you still have so many important stories to cover in addition to the long-term story of press freedom in your country. I wanted to ask you the basic story of why do you do this? Why do you and your team put yourselves at risk every day to fight for press freedom and cover the stories of your country?
I think about it as it's our job. It really is a time here in the Philippines where it's even more important to do that than ever. The mission of journalism is more important than ever. And as the world has been turned upside down by technology, our information ecosystem it's inside out, right? As that has happened, I think journalists by and large all around the world have held the line. We continue doing our jobs. It's a little bit more dangerous. I could go to jail. But I think what we do, the more stories we do now that hold power to account, the greater the chances that I will not go to jail.
And Ramona, you decided to cover this story and to make this the subject of your documentary film. Can you tell me why and tell me the story behind the title, please?
Well, when I make films, it's a process of getting to the story. I usually am drawn by something connected to it, maybe. Like, for instance, with 1,000 Cuts, I was drawn to the drug war in the Philippines and actually the rise of Duterte. The fact that Duterte became president in 2016. I was raised under martial law in the Philippines, so I know what it's like to live under dictatorship. And when Duterte became president, it was alarming to me. It was troubling. And I now live in the US, but I do make films about the Philippines and about the, and the Filipino-American experience or the Filipino experience. So that's what drew me to the Philippines at first, the drug war. But when I got to the ground in 2017, a lot of people were making films about the drug war, which was it was an obvious story. It's full of spectacle. Um, and so I felt like, let me look around to see what else is going on. And Maria and Rappler were going on, but they were talking about the drug war. They're questioning the numbers of dead, the official numbers versus the human rights groups numbers. They were very different. They were questioning impunity, and relating that to disinformation and the weaponization of social media. So I felt like it was a more global story, although it's very specifically still the Philippines. It sort of transcends the specificity and makes it global because it is a problem all over the world. So that's how it started. Then I realized, okay, this is the story I want to tell. So it is, for me, it's usually an exploration, and then I come to the story. And of course, then there's Maria. I mean, she unwraps it very clearly. It's always when she talks about it, it's always this aha moment, right? And that's what you want for film. And also she gave us lots of access, which is what I'm always looking for, because that's what I do. I always say I film behavior. That's what I do. That's what I look for, and that's why I stay longest. I want to be the first one in the room and the last one in it too. The last one to be kicked out of the room. But that's my intention. And it's 1,000 cuts because it's death by 1,000 cuts of a democracy. It's not. It's very different from. I always describe it. Compare it to the time of martial law in the Philippines. Say with President Marcos. During dictatorship, during martial law, it was so obvious, right? He declared martial law, he shut down Congress, he imprisoned all his opposition leaders, all the journalists. It was so clear it was now under martial law. But there was one that's more insidious because there's still this veil of legitimacy, of democracy, right? So they make, Maria, say, for example, has 8 court cases against her. But all those 8 cases are little cuts to democracy. Every time she has to appear in court, every time they hit her, right? And it's about fear. It's about instilling fear. If they can do that to someone like Maria, who has a voice, who has a presence globally, they can do that to any journalist in the Philippines.
Certainly.
So that's why it's 1,000 cuts.
Yeah. And Raney, you really sit at the intersection between these two worlds, between breaking news and documentary filmmaking. Can you tell us how you see the intersection of those two worlds and why you are able to bring those together and how?
Well, I'll start by saying that this film is the perfect example of that. So first of all, we've known Maria for a number of years at Frontline. We featured some of the reporting that Rappler did a number of years ago. And I'll never forget in the edit room when we first saw Maria, because I wasn't the producer in the field, we were like, who's that? Okay, first of all, who is she? What is Rappler doing? And she was one of the first people to talk with actual examples about the impact of social platforms like Facebook. So she got our attention about the disruption that was happening in journalism, how, when she said the thing about gatekeepers, that's the sort of headline for me at all times right now, which is we no longer control, which is maybe good too, right? There's actual nuance to that, the flow of information. So when you have a platform like Facebook, and they were reporting actively on the impact of Facebook in the Philippines, I immediately started to understand that, okay, the world is never going to be the same again when it comes to information, and that they were at the actual vanguard of reporting on that and also using the platform, right? So that's how she got my attention. When Ramona came along, who I've been a long time admirer of, and actually always wanted Ramona to make a film for Frontline, right? I love her filmmaking sensibility. I love her journalism inside her films, that you're watching it, but you're not really like getting spinach, right? You're actually just seeing something that's so remarkable that you're lost in it. And that's the beauty of documentary film, right? That you're not actually, thinking that you need to learn something. You're just like, you're awash with a story. So that's her talent. And when they had made this beautiful film, Ramona and her team, I just said to her, we really hope we could be the home for this type of story because of Maria and the combination of Ramona. And for us, you know, the work that we're starting to see emerge in documentary film is really breaking through those barriers, right? It's saying, take a moment and actually understand what's happening in the world. We need the long form documentary to actually explore these complexities in a way that I don't know was as important before, but we are awash right now in short form, in quick bits, in moments that pass by us that we don't know what's true and not right now, right? Every single person's having this experience with media. So that's why documentary film right now is one of the most important places for serious journalism, in my opinion. And I think this is the best example of what I've seen there when it comes to, you know, helping us understand the importance of the freedom of the press, but also the struggle in which Maria is facing is one that we're facing, is one that the journalists in Brazil are facing, the journalists in Turkey, the journalists in Russia. This is not a single story. It just happens that Maria is a catalyst for us to understand it in Ramona's directorial hands. So that's sort of how Frontline came to be passionate about this film.
Thank you. And every time a journalist is targeted and a leader decides to name a journalist, they become the story. Can you tell us, Maria, what it's like to become the story? I know it's something that journalists loathe, and you've been put at the center of this.
It's been 4 years, and that I think is the other part. So um, the Philippines is a strange place, and in the sense of, our constitution is essentially based on the United States. So we have a Bill of Rights, and yet our institutions are weaker. We have endemic corruption, and law and order is weak. When President Duterte won elections and he began to attack journalists in the way that he did, one of the first statements he gave, and it's in the film, he said, just because you're a journalist, you're not exempt from assassination. Uh, on July 8th this year, he did a nationwide address and he spent that time attacking me, threatening me. What do you do? I am a journalist, yes, but I'm also a citizen of this country. And for a president to do that, there's something very, very wrong with the asymmetry of it. So I react like a journalist. Um, I do the stories. I want to understand, and I think sometimes President Duterte, the government doesn't quite understand why I react the way I do, because I'm not angry. I I want to understand how this happened, because it was also enabled, right? But your question is, how do I feel? It's been 4 years, so weaponization of social media bottom up, weaponization of the law top down, uh, changing the world I live in. I mean, in 2016, the narrative of journalist equals criminal was seeded uh, by state networks, disinformation networks. And in 2016, I laughed because I thought by next year I'll have been a journalist for 35 years, and people will see that. But guess what? There's no context in social media. It's atomized into meaninglessness, and it doesn't matter. And then from 2016 to 2020, all of a sudden, journalist equals criminal. I was convicted June 15th. So there's a lot of things in between. So, and I think that's part of what the film captured. But the other part is it's still going. And post US elections, folks think everything is okay because Joe Biden won. It's still going. And I don't think that, regardless of who won these elections, the problems are still there. That's worrisome to me.
And I just add that it's really interesting covering a journalist. I've made films about former first ladies, rock stars, teachers, mothers, but covering a journalist is so different because you guys are so aware of story, right? So every time, like, Maria would turn to me and say, "So do you have it?" I'm like, "Have what?" I'm like, "I don't know if I have it yet. I'll tell you when I have it." And I usually film for long periods of time. So it was just an interesting thing, but it took her a while to get used to being the story. And I don't think that was ever,
Hate
um,
it.
yes, yes. and made it known to me the entire time. But yeah, it was just an interesting, because it was very meta. You know, she was always referring to what was going on, but then I was like, I'm not sure if I have it. I'll let you know. Yeah, it's just interesting.
About that, I was laughing with Maria and Ramona one day because I said to her, like, you know, as a journalist, as you said, Elisa, you know, we're really trying not to be the story, right? But Maria just said it really bluntly, like, well, what do you do when you are the story, actually? So you are the person, the actual person who's being personally attacked. You and your news organization, your reporting, your actual work is being personally attacked. You have to actually, because you actually are the story, and Ramona was there to capture it all. That's kind of a brilliant combination for a documentary, but it also changes how we see journalism today, right? The journalists themselves, who didn't want to be the people in the spotlight, are now the protagonists of this story by virtue of the direct attack. And I think that's something that we really haven't seen. We've seen a few, you know, extraordinary situations like that in the past, but you haven't seen that writ large, where journalists are becoming the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know how dangerous that can really be. Maria, you having the platform that you have and the voice that you have become a target. And we know that so many other journalists around the world are facing the same kind of threats and attacks. I wonder, Ramona, if you thought about the safety issue. It's one that we deal with every day and one that's at the center of Maria's story in terms of digital security as well as physical security, and what your thought process was throughout your filming. And I wonder now if you have concerns and have taken steps so that you don't become a part of this story as well.
Well, okay, so two, right? The physical security. You know, once you're following someone who has to don a bulletproof vest, it makes you stop, right? You're like, okay, should I be thinking about this differently? And my concern was my local crew, because I live in the US. I flew in cinematographers and sound recordists, but then everyone else was local. So I had to have a real conversation with them, because listen, we weren't afraid really of the administration, because the administration, they were aware we were making this film. As you see in A Thousand Cuts, I did film close allies of Duterte, Mocha Uson, and General De La Rosa. They are in the film. They were aware, and I think their being aware that we were making this film actually gave us a security blanket, you know, because we couldn't hide. Every time Maria was arrested on television, they saw us, right? We were running
They
out.
were on television.
Yeah, maybe we were on television, but it's really the ones who show up at Rappler, right? The crazies who think they're doing it on behalf of the administration. Those are the unknowns. That was really more the fear. And so I had to have a conversation with the local crew and to give them an out. I said, listen, it's turned out that this is not, you know, we're following Maria Ressa, and you can leave, you know, and I won't take it against you. You can now walk out of the project, you know, and I'll understand. But not one of them did. They all stayed because they really felt it was a story to tell, which is very touching. I remember that conversation. It was over dinner, and not one of them said, but I just wanted full transparency. I said, this is a situation. You all know it. We can talk about it. So for as long as I could control their safety, what we decided to do was we were housed in just 3 apartments. You know, so even if they were local, you know, they didn't have to go home. Usually it would take them an hour to go home, an hour to get back, and we had long, long days. So I said, you know, let's just have like camp 1,000 cuts. That's what we did. So everyone stayed together for the 4 months that we shot the principal photography, the bulk of the film, which was set against the backdrop of the midterm elections. So that's how, so that's how we dealt with it. And as far as I was like, I think I'd regret it forever if I didn't make this film, right? It was to me almost, not that I didn't have a choice, but my imagined regret, I think outweighed any fear I had at that point. And, you know, Maria was so brave. We're like, okay, let's just be brave. And she always said, touch your fear. I'm like, okay, let's touch her fear. And then we won't be it won't be unknown. In terms of the digital security, you know, it's the trolls come after the film, but not me, really. They're still going after Maria. It's still Maria, really, who is their target, and the film. And we've taken measures, actually. Yeah, so it's still they're still after Maria, though.
We see that too, actually, in most of our reporting. It's the not to second guess this tactic, but it's usually the people who are appearing in the films. It's the protagonists of the films. But digital security is something Frontline's been really pushing in on lately, because we've had situations of doxing and other very, very aggressive things that have happened to our journalists, even in the United States. So it's not just reporting overseas anymore. It's when we're sending, you know, producers and directors into the protests in the United States, even, for example, you know, they're carrying now with them, you know, ballistic gear and flak jackets. And, you know, they really are going in as if they could be attacked, because I think there is a feeling that journalists are, you know, there's a free for all when it comes to journalists. So we take that very, very seriously. Safety we take more seriously than anything.
That's great. We certainly have seen the number of attacks increase online and offline around the world and in the US, and providing resources to those journalists, including freelancers, is incredibly important. So I'm happy to hear that after a long time of digital security being ignored by major media and mainstream media, it's really becoming a key issue. And it's one that primarily impacts women journalists.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's important to point that out too. And Maria, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the percentage of women at Rappler, which is tremendous, and the impact that these dangers has had on them, on social media, but also on their families.
So Rappler is about 100 people. We're 63% women, and the median age is 23 years old. So it's young, women, and female. And when the attacks began against us in 2016, the way we dealt with it was to gather data and understand what was happening. And then after that, when we realized how many of us were being attacked, the first one is to give ourselves permission to actually talk about it, because the first thing at the very beginning, it makes you feel ashamed. You may be doing something wrong, right? We absorbed it. I absorbed it first, and then when we realized this was happening and they weren't, they mean to pound you to silence. Then we offered counseling. But Lisa, you know, at that point in 2016, I think even our counselors didn't know how to deal with exponential attacks. So the DART Center came in to train the trainers, but the DART Center was learning as well. We were all learning. Um, uh, Women in the Philippines, according to our data, are attacked at least 10 times more than men. And this happened again this week. President Duterte, well, just now, so I don't know when this will show, right? But what is today's date? Today is, so on November 17th, President Duterte attacked with sexist and misogynist phrases and innuendos the vice president of the Philippines, Leni Robredo. This is like a nightly thing. And I worry about the impact. Well, the US has felt some of this as well. So when your leader does that, what happens, right? Um, yeah, I don't know. We're going to deal with the impact of this for many years to come, I think.
Yeah, I think what was so surprising to me was when he did go on this misogynistic attacks during the campaign, during the midterm elections. You saw it in the film, that people would laugh, right? And I think I've always wondered about that. And but it was always a mixture of nervous laughter and seeing him as some kind of entertainer, really. Because I said during the midterm elections, it's a mix of entertainment and politics. Well, mostly entertainment, and then you sort of slip in a little bit of politics in there, political speeches. But so it's all a mix, and I think they saw it as some kind of like stand-up comic. So but the women were like, you know, they were laughing, but it was nervous laughter. They knew it was very uncomfortable and really interesting and scary, troubling to observe while you're there with kids running around, you know. That's even
Well,
more troubling.
yeah, that happens here too. So sadly, that is not a unique incident to the Philippines. And I wonder what you think about when leaders attack the news media. Obviously, that contributes to the mistrust. But I don't think that that could be as powerful as it has been if the mistrust hadn't already started. Can you talk a little bit about the mistrust of the news media and how your work and how you're trying, both all of you, to change that, and how we can get the public to regain the trust that we need in order to have the media be as influential as it used to be?
I want to hear Raney first because in the US, and then then we
Yeah.
can let.
Yeah, I mean, I think we share the blame, but I want to be very careful here because there's a big economic disruption that happened in journalism that most people don't acknowledge. And what essentially happened, and we spent a year studying this on a night commission with a number of other colleagues and myself, is we actually identified that one of the biggest precursors to lack of trust is the lack of local journalism. So local journalism being disrupted in the United States of America was a big game changer. So if you look at trust indicators, most people have trust first and foremost with their local media, that local journalists, local newspapers, online efforts, right? And then the national media has always been mildly distrusted. But when the two work together and they had this same, actual prism of thinking, vision, then people trusted the media more. And we can actually track this with the disruption that was happening at the local level. I think now one of the biggest issues, and a lot of people have been writing it lately, is how do you cover someone like President Trump? I think it took the national media, I'll include Frontline in this as well, a long time to figure out how do you actually call a lie a lie? When do you do that? How do you do that with context? We just had a situation in which we had President Trump speaking live, and a lot of the networks then decided to pull away from that, right? And that's a really big thing for us to do, to say that the President of the United States, we can't even give enough context to allow him to air live, right? So Frontline's not a live show, but I am actually married to Aronson-Rath, who's one of the NPR and All Things Consider's hosts. And he was talking to me multiple times over the last few months about how they've had to make an editorial decision about when to lean in when President Trump is speaking, when to actually pull out. So these are the kind of decisions we're making to actually make sure that when people are watching us, they trust us, right? That what you're hearing on our air, what you're hearing digitally is true. The other thing we're doing at Frontline, and a lot of other journalists are doing this as well, is to open up our journalism, to say, if you want to come in and look at our journalism, here are extended transcripts, here are unedited videos, come in and look, come under the tent of Frontline, and you can ask us those really tough questions. But I don't think it's an easy fix, but I think social media and the lack of gatekeepers across the board and the attack on journalism from leaders across the world is really effective to also inherently attack us day after day after day. Will also, like, it hurts trust across the board. So I don't think there's the easy fix except for fact-based journalism and calling a lie, and calling misinformation, talking about conspiracy theories, being sophisticated enough about how conspiracy theories travel to report on it. That's the other thing, is that we all need to become better at reporting on these issues so that we can actually talk about them. So this is a catch-up game as well for a lot of us in journalism.
I want to jump in and take from there, right? Like, so I think that, you know, all the studies now show this. There's a 2018 Science magazine article that shows it. Our experience shows this. Lies laced with anger and hate spread faster and further on social media than facts. So facts are really boring. The social media platforms that deliver the news, the facts, are biased against facts, right? So when lies become facts, facts don't exist. And when that happens, what does that do to truth? What does that do to trust? I think in the last few years, news organizations take too much of the blame because not enough of us understand the technology. right now the social media platforms have become behavior modification systems, meaning that it has our data. They create models of each of us. So we put it all in, they create the models with machine learning, and then artificial intelligence takes that up and sells our weakest, our most vulnerable moment to a message and sells it to a company that is a different type of advertising than what we were used to, or a country, and that would be propaganda, right? When it were nudged, whatever we choose to do then becomes part of that perpetual machine, that behavior modification system. So truth and trust, how do these exist in a world that where lies become facts? I think that's the first question. The second question is, I watched in the Philippines the polarization of society. We didn't have the Fox and the CNN. We didn't have the things that the United States has. Our news organizations pretty much stayed in the center. And again, because of the technology, I watched the splintering of society in the last 4 years. Very similar, I think, to what happened to when you're attacked on both sides of Black Lives Matter, when influence operations play with your head, when your behavior is modified, right? How does that play out in real life? So I my answer to you here is, this isn't a problem that news organizations can solve. We're no longer the gatekeepers. We're not manipulating the user of the platforms that deliver the facts. This is why we need regulation. Sorry, just up front. Sorry, I go too far on this, Raney, right? And I'm actually.
I think there's no simple answer. I think this is, we need to become increasingly sophisticated about this. That's why I said, seeing and hearing Maria 4 years ago for Frontline was the biggest shift in our thinking, right? We actually made really big decisions not to treat Facebook as a journalism platform, right? We started to learn, like, okay, what platforms are we going to actually publish on? Our actual original journalism? Do we partner with Facebook? What do we do as a journalism organization to make sure that what you're seeing and reading and watching from us is actually what you would call real journalism, right? So I don't think journalists can get entirely off the hook, but I also agree with everything Maria said. And we need serious people and serious around a table to talk about, what does this mean for the future of truth, right? I mean, this is something, you can't talk about this with any more urgency, because the other thing that's happening, and Ramona and I have talked about this, is our children no longer can trust anything that they're seeing. This is the first experience for children who are in their teens, for example, who are having an unmitigated media experience, right, in any generation. So they're already awash in disinformation and misinformation. So what are we going to do about that? So if they're corrupted in terms of truth so early, how do we build this idea that there is trusted media? And that's what we need to come together to think about. And one thing is true, is that films like 1,000 Cuts will help you understand the importance of it. So you might get activated, right? Like, we're not advocates, but one thing we can advocate for is the freedom of the press, right? Is journalism with a capital J. And that's what this film did for me, is just make me see it. Okay, we think our audience will become activated when they see this. They'll become engaged. They'll say, actually, this matters, right? That's half our battle, is that people don't see that we matter. Because, we talked about this before, but, corruption doesn't just show its face, right? So if journalists aren't in there showing the corruption, people don't know. So that's why journalists are underappreciated. It's because if there aren't journalists around, nobody really knows what's happening. So it's okay that we're not there, right, making trouble. And as Ramona has this great thing that says, what is your latest slogan? You got to show it. If you have it, Ian.
This is our social impact campaign. It's just, don't shut up.
Don't shut up.
It's actually from what Maria says. It's like the best way to call the government to account is to never shut up, right? Because they want you to shut up. So don't shut up. That's our, yeah. So that's actually from something Maria said.
Wait, you know what, Raney, you said something that I'm going to, and I think this is interesting because we are now on different sides. Raney, you said we're not activists. I now will actually, I think the journey of 1,000 Cuts Ramona, you say.
No. It's very interesting that I saw that journey. I mean, Maria went from not being an activist to
Like
slowly being an
Raney,
activist.
too.
Yeah, but and I remember the moment when she said it. Actually, we were at the Annenberg School at UPenn, and she said it at a conference. She said that journalism is activism, and you could hear a pin drop. And then after that, it was like the pushback Maria had. I'm like, and it's a shame we had stopped filming already. I was there actually to actually show you a cut of the film or something. Um, yeah, but it was really an evolution. But I guess if you are, if you are fighting for facts, right? Does that make you an activist? I suppose it
I think
does. I don't know.
here's what I think. I think it's not, I think there's nuance here. I think we need to come up with a different word than activist, okay? An activist might not be looking at both sides of the story really critically, okay? What we believe, at least at Frontline, so I can't speak for all of journalism, is that we're actually holding ourselves to account, that you don't get into the easier type of activism, which is to say, XYZ 100%. We like nuance. We like there to be a varied point of view. If it's valid to have that argument, we want to have it. Can we be activists for the freedom of the press? Absolutely. Can we have an anti-racist stance about things? Absolutely. Are we going to have a 50-50 discussion about climate change? Absolutely not, right? We're going to say climate change is real. But I don't want to become like something that's only activism, because then people on both sides won't take it seriously. So I want us to be accountability journalists. And actually, I would argue what Maria's Rappler does is exactly that, right? They may be portrayed as activists because they're being attacked, right? So you're seen as the opposition, but actually all they're doing is practicing investigative hardcore journalism. That's what you're doing. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, but also, Maria, there is a personal, right? There is a personal because she was detained. She was arrested. So suddenly she becomes the story. And of course, you have to speak up against your rights are being violated. You speak up. Does that then make you an activist, right? But she's now become the story because she was the one arrested. And she always says, I'm taking the words out of your mouth, right, that she was unshackled when she was arrested. And because then she had to speak out.
Yeah, I respect that. I do. And that's why we're actually, we support this film.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think
that's important. That's a really important.
And it's a debate that has been going on for a long time. And it's been a debate where there's been a divide between US journalism and basically all journalism around the world, where journalists are much more willing to define themselves as activists because they are often reporting on their own communities and fighting against government oppression. And it's two different worlds. But this is a debate that has been going on for decades and probably will continue. But I want to ask Rona one more question about your intent here, because did you come into this thinking that you were going to be reporting or doing a documentary on press freedom? Was that how you came into this? Obviously, it was about Maria, it was about Rappler, it was about the Philippines, but it is a press freedom story. And I'm wondering how much of that was intentional.
In the beginning, not at all, right? It evolved. I always do, like I said in the beginning, there's always an impulse, right? There's always that first story that draws me back to the country. And this time it was Duterte, for sure. The rise of Duterte, his drug war, his horrific drug war. Because I started seeing photographs of the drug war on my feed, right, on social media, and they were horrific. I'm like, what is going on in that country? But he did campaign on the drug war. So he was making good on his promise. I'm like, oh my goodness. So that's what drew me first. The fact that, and then when I get there and I start exploring, I start researching, it's this process of Maria becoming the center of gravity, really, of the film, and realizing that in real time, because I think the very first day of principal photography, Maria got arrested. So I was like in the stream of the story. And when it hits you, It's like the documentary gods give you a gift for me, but not for Maria. I'm sorry, you were arrested. But you know what I'm saying? It's like here, she's arrested and you are in detainment with her. So you pull out your phone. I pulled out my phone. My crew were not in the country yet. And then it slowly becomes apparent that, okay, Maria is a story, but what is the story of Maria? It's press freedom. It's a fight for press freedom. So it becomes clear as the story unfolds, and then there's a discipline, right? Where do you root it? What is the point of view of the story? It had to be clearly Maria's point of view, and then you make the decision as you are filming, which is also it's how I work. As a story unfolds, you decide, okay, then it is her point of view. Let's stick to that. So I had 2 units in the ground, and 1 unit really stuck with Maria for the entire time because we knew then that she was going to be the center of gravity. I call it the center of gravity of the film.
Yeah. Maria, I have a question for you as well, which is that you are fighting press freedom in the Philippines, but you have a lot of support from the international community, from nonprofit organizations. Can you talk about the role and the importance of having that support and how that has influenced your struggle and helped you if it has?
I think it's the reason we're still alive. You know, ABS-CBN, the largest broadcaster in the Philippines, was shut down on May 5, right? And this was a threat. President Duterte said years ago, soon after he took power, that he wouldn't renew their franchise. It's not the executive that does that, it's the legislator, right? So legislative capture. Look, in April 2018, so January 2018, the government revoked our license to operate. We continued fighting for it. We're fighting it in court, and we continued operating. We refused to shut down. By April, we lost 49% of our advertising revenue because advertisers are afraid. And so we were forced to find a new business model and pivot. And at the same time, we were slammed with legal fees, legal exponential, to the tune of a third of our operating cost every month. We wouldn't have survived this without the help of our community, and that community was really the spark, was the international community. So we wouldn't survive without the help shining the light. Thank you, Frontline, early on, right? CBS, and I mean, the international focus helped us stay alive. The second part was our community, which was scared. We live in an environment of violence and fear. They started coming out because others, because Frontline would do the story, then someone else who lives here will do a little bit more. And then our community started to help us. Our crowdfunding campaign grew. So it's on all those fronts. If it was just us alone, it would have been very easy to shut us down and to shut me up. The reason why we can continue, why we hold the line, is because you help us. The international community. So here's the last part. I'd say global is local and local is global. The the rise of President Duterte was enabled by American social media platforms. The attacks against me were enabled, were allowed to grow. That changed the way Filipinos look at me. Um, and what happened here also will have global impact in terms of democracy and how the geopolitical power play that's happening. The United States versus China. The last takedown of Facebook on September 22, they took down two influence operations. One was from China that was targeting me and Rappler, but of course it was a pro-Chinese network. It was also already beginning to campaign for the daughter of President Duterte in the 2022 presidential elections here. That same network was attacking in the US elections as well, right? The second network was Philippine police and military linked. Anyway, so I guess local is global, global is local. And without your help, we could not have survived this.
Well, we couldn't be more grateful for what you do every day as well. And Raney and Ramona, I want to ask you, what do you see? What is the ability of your viewers, the people who see your work, to also contribute to supporting press freedom?
So what we've seen is the more we do stories like this, the more we hear from our community that it matters. So I actually do think it's about the value proposition that journalism holds in both the Philippines and the United States, across the world. We're actually getting more attention now than ever, which the only silver lining is that people may appreciate us more. Back to the idea that corruption doesn't show its face. It's a really important component here, right? The more that we talk about this, the more someone like Maria Ressa and Ramona tell these stories in a way that's big, right? Not in a small way, but in a big film, and an idea that the whole, not just in the United States, but it did for all around the world, this film will be seen. And my hope is that that will activate people to understand the importance of this and to stick up for journalism. And we're starting to see that happen more and more. And it's because of the bravery, but also the fact that Maria, for a lot of us in journalism, I said this to Ramona in the first place, she's really is our North Star, right? We need her. We need her, right? We need her not to go to jail. We need to be able to keep journalists working, right? And I think the more there's a movement around journalism, the better. And I guess that's sounding a little bit like an activist myself. So there you go.
My job as a filmmaker is to give audiences an experience, and to make both a timely film and a timeless film. So hopefully in 20 years, you watch this film and it is still resonant, right? Not that, press freedom was, the press will still be distrusted, but the themes are big, right? The themes of authoritarianism, press freedom, responsibility, who speaks truth to power, the David and Goliath story, those are timeless. I think because when people hear press freedom, what is that really, right? So films like mine, I think, give you a character. You go through the journey with a character and you experience what it is, right? It makes it come alive almost. And it makes something that is sometimes very abstract, very real and intimate. So to me, that's my job as a filmmaker.
Can you talk a little about your audience, Ramona? Your audience who have seen your film already, and those who you hope will continue to see it?
So we premiered this film at Sundance earlier this year in January, in Park City. Um, we finished it so fast that I didn't really have time to think of how the audience was going to react. But after that first screening, Maria was there actually. Um, uh, uh, Most of the audience came up to me, and it really resonated personally with them. What was happening in the film was happening in the US, and they felt there were a lot of parallels. And it never, the film never even mentions Trump. It doesn't have to. It does. Maybe there's one picture of Trump and Duterte, but it never makes that direct connection. And I think that's what film does. It doesn't have to. It just shows you, and you feel it. You feel that there's something very familiar with the story, that it affects you personally. And that was, I thought that would happen, but then it was made clear to me that it was really hitting people personally. um, and and that was the US. And in the Philippines, we actually screened it right before Maria's verdict was handed down on June 15th with the help of Frontline. Thank you so much. I had this crazy idea, because we were in lockdown, it was pandemic. I didn't think people were paying attention to Maria's cases. I'm like, let's just, I need to call attention to that verdict. So I had this crazy idea of releasing the film for 24 hours for free in June in the Philippines, only geo-blocked. And I mentioned this to Maria on a Monday, and then she goes, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea. Can you pull it off?" But of course, I had to ask Frontline, and I didn't know whether they were going to say yes. I mean, the proposal was 24 hours for free in the Philippines, but no one else had seen the film aside from the premiere at Sundance, because this was in June. Or I think we did screen at some other festival, but not widely. But thank you, Raney, because they said yes. They said sure. They were willing. I mean, all the stakeholders, Frontline, Concordia, the Women
Everybody
A topic.
said, like,
It
let's do
was
it.
it
There's
was so incredible that you said yes.
yeah. Well, of course we would, but we are public media. So we would be inclined to say yes, more people in the public need to see it. But it was great that the partners, like everybody who said,
Yeah.
people in the Philippines need to understand the ramifications of what just happened were huge. That was so huge. The feedback was amazing and hundreds of
Yeah.
people watched.
So I was they were prepping me for an audience because we did it so quickly, right? We didn't really have time to advertise, none of that. So the folks at Frontline were saying, we get an average audience of maybe between 20 and 40,000, but because we didn't have time to advertise, don't expect that, right? Maybe the low end. I'm like, that's fine. If 10,000 people see it, 10,000 people know about this verdict. Because right after the 24-hour period, we had a live talk back with Raney, Maria, myself, and Julie Pussetti of ICFJ. But at the end of the 24-hour period, we got 230,000 full views of the film, and people were actually talking about. I heard from strangers throughout that weekend. Something happened. The zeitgeist, you can never recreate it, but something happened. I guess because we were in lockdown. It was Independence Day. They were trying to protest, but the police dispersed the crowd, so they went home. By the time they got home, the film was on, right? So all the timing of this crazy thing, the anti-terror law became a bill. The largest broadcast media was shut down in the Philippines. So much was going on, and you're in lockdown, one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. They couldn't go anywhere aside from trying to celebrate Independence Day. So, and I think I was ready for I was ready for the anger after the film, but not the sadness. I think the prevalent feeling that weekend was that people felt very sad and disappointed in themselves that they had taken their eyes off the ball, right? Because it took so many years to build these institutions of democracy after the Marcos dictatorship, and it takes one president to take that all away, right? In between, after 4 years, when was it? 2016 to 4 years, so quickly. And it was disappointment in themselves that they weren't vigilant. And that I wasn't prepared for that. It was a very, very emotional weekend. So yeah, so we haven't been back. We will be back in the Philippines before the end of the year. And then of course there's a broadcast. There's Frontline broadcast in January, which is going to be
yeah, we're really looking forward to it. It's definitely like our biggest film of the year. We're really excited about it, and the PBS audience, but beyond PBS, it'll be seen streaming on pbs.org, but also on YouTube. So it's going to be a huge hit. Hopefully, millions more people will see this important film.
That's terrific. I think we just have a few more minutes left, and I'll leave the last word to Maria and ask you what you think will be the outcome of so many people seeing this film, and what you hope for.
I mean, I think this is an existential moment. And not just for me, not just for the Philippines. I think this is a time when we have to fight for democracy. And Raney said it, there's a lot of different strands that need to come together, but this is it. And the battle is ours to fight. Right? It isn't against one leader or another. It's actually an entire system. And the way we are relating to each other, are the main distribution platform distributes hate speech, conspiracy theories, disinformation. What are we going to need to build? How are we? I guess the last thing I'll say is please ask yourself the same question I asked myself in 2016 when everything started going crazy. And it's this: what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? Because I think that's what's at stake now.
Thank you. And thank you all. Thank you, Maria, Raney, Ramona. What an incredible film. What an important subject. And we are deeply grateful for all of your work. Thank you.
And thank you for your work as well. It's really important. We all need that as well.
Thanks.